Trikowski, and we've lived at this house here in mid Carmel Valley for about 35 years, since 1985. It's on a 1/2 acre lot, and when we first moved here, it was a jungle. There were cypress trees growing up against the house. They were growing all the way up to the roof. There were big pine trees with limbs overhanging the roof. And by the way, the roof was a wood shake roof, which back in the 70s and 80s were considered desirable. We know better now. The driveway was obstructed by big pine trees with overhanging limbs, so there was no way that an emergency vehicle could have gotten in. There were pine needles everywhere, and we had these conifers, which, as we know now, are highly flammable. They burn very hot, very fast, and being against the house was very dangerous. But it was 1985, and I knew nothing about wildfires, about fire fuel reduction. I was just happy as a pig in a puddle to have my own house on a nice, quiet cul-de-sac with friendly neighbors. And then a couple years later, the Pebble Beach fire happened. And I saw 47 big, substantial homes burn to the ground in an overgrown pine forest. And we started hearing about excessive fire fuels and forest management. And I realized then that it was time to do something with our jungle and our forest. So at that time, of course, I was a young adult. Now I'm a senior citizen. Now, of course, it's much more daunting to think about fire fuel reduction. But at the time, we were new homeowners and we just started where we could. We started with removing the cypress hedges away from the house, getting the tree limbs away from the roof, limbing up the trees by the driveway so that there would be ingress and egress space for emergency vehicles. And we started clearing weeds and we removed even some of the bigger trees that were near the house, the pine trees. And of course, pine pitch canker came along and sort of helped us with that because it killed some of these trees, and then we were removing dead trees. So then in 1993, the first Malibu fire came along, and I watched many homes, big substantial homes, burn to the ground. But I heard that those that were spared had one thing in common. They had Class A fire resistant roofs. And so very quickly, soon after, we put together the plan to get a Class A composite asphalt shingle roof on and get rid of the wood shake roof. And of course, as we continued on this process, we kept realizing that stuff grows back, and it's an ongoing process. But in the meantime, we talked to our adjoining neighbors and realized that we could plan to get rid of trees and vegetation on our shared lot lines in ways that would make all of our properties safer. And it turns out that when you coordinate with your neighbors for tree cutting, you can save some money because many times the tree companies will give you a discount if they can do multiple jobs on one street. And also, we have gotten gutter guards since then for our house to keep the pine needles and leaves out of the gutters, and we're much more diligent about keeping debris and pine needles and leaves off the roof. Now, I myself cannot go up on a roof and do this, but I do hire people. And if there's difficulty with that, remember, you can ask for help. Sometimes there are neighbors or friends who will help you with these kinds of chores. It's really important to keep the pine needles off of your roof and decks because an ember from an adjacent fire can travel 1 to 2 miles. A burning ember can travel 1 to 2 miles, and still, when it gets to your house, will be hot enough to ignite some dry debris on your roof or deck. So this is very important. The other thing we have done was we have kept our yard more maintenance free, so we've removed a lot of the vegetation and replaced it with just open space with chips or gravel. Being careful, of course, to keep the chips away from the base of the house where the siding is, because smoldering chips can ignite your house. We have also put up or installed more hose bibs in the yard and around the house with hoses attached, so that in case of an approaching fire, we can wet down the roof and the yard, or we can even put out a small fire that might ignite in our yard. And I have invested in more fire extinguishers, which I keep in the house in plain view. They are now part of the decor because I want to be able to grab one quickly if I need it in a hurry. Now, recently, we've been thinking more about evacuation, especially since